Text me maybe. Text me sometime. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Would you shell out 16 gigabytes to match Wits with this?
Upgrades, update.
And Twit Tawoo. All this and more coming up on this week's show for Saturday, the 12th of July, 2025. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello everyone. Hello twirlers. Hello audience. Hello Jason. Hello Chris. My name's Dave. I am one of the hosts on This Week in Retro. Jason, identify yourself.
I am identified as that they call Jason, and thank you so much, Dave, for introducing us so promptly at the top of the show.
That's right. And I am Chris. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done, everyone. We got our names right.
Has anyone done any retro this week?
I got my new Ultimate 64, which is the FPGA implementation of the Commodore 64 and a bunch of add-ons integrated. Long journey. You usually order these things several months in advance, and which is what I did. And it was a long journey from Central Europe to here, but it's here. It's installed. I've been copying things over to it, so that's been my excitement.
Fantastic. How does it feel using an FPGA Commodore 64 compared to a real one? Have you convinced yourself it's real?
I have convinced myself that it is as real as I need it to be and far beats a lot of the alternatives. Like, I do still use the original hardware, but it's undeniable to me that I really like the crisp HDMI display. I really like the ability to switch NTSC and PAL, with a little toggle, in the software menu. So for me, and we can talk about stuff like this, but like, I've realized that trying to simulate the experiences of 40 years ago, like there are tactile things like the smell of an arcade that you just can't recreate with whatever, even if you put the arcade cabinet in your own home. So I tend to look for, is this solving the problems I want to solve now? Yeah.
You take an old training shoe and stub a cigarette in it. Chris.
I'm once again getting ready for a comp. So you know how I'm terrible at mentioning things in time for the event to happen. This time, I think I've actually mentioned it in time. There's a Street Fighter 2 comp at the Palace Arcade in Northbridge in Perth on the Saturday, the 19th of July. So if you're in the area, look that up.
Australia Perth. Not
Australia
real Perth.
No, wait, there might be one there as well, Dave. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, good point. There could be one in both.
Yeah. So I'm getting ready for that.
I've been looking to order a new computer. I'm going to build myself a new PC. I'm going to go far over the top. Haven't done one for a long time, mainly because I've got a USB problem, and that's my excuse for not troubleshooting it properly. Chris recently bought a new laptop, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you quite like it.
I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, a laptop, did you say? Yeah, just a laptop, yeah.
A MacBook, Dave. You have to say MacBook.
Yes, a MacBook.
Yeah.
Sorry, a MacBook Air. And I'm a bit jealous. So I want a new shiny thing. So that's what I've been doing this week. We're going to get right into it, though. I think we're going to get right into it with our big story this week is going to be some amazing news from Jason.
You leap at Julian, taking him completely off guard and pull him from his horse. The hounds mill around you frantically as you throw him to the ground and put your sword to his neck. He stares up at you defiantly as you kick his sword out of reach. Please insert Disk B in Drive 1. Press any key when ready. Wampus Byte brings news that warms my text adventurer heart that the eXoRetro team have released the first version of their eXoIF collection, that IF for interactive fiction. This follows on in a series of other collections which attempt to be definitive or at least highly complete and playable on modern machines. It includes EXODOS, which we've talked about here for MS-DOS era games, Exo Apple II GS, the eXoRetro Learning Project to archive educational software titles. Now, this first release of eXoIF has close to 900 games. They're generally, but not exclusively, from the commercial text adventure market period, which kind of straddles the late 1970s to about the mid-1990s. And there are some classic mainframe games, including, yes, the Colossal Cave Adventure that's usually kind of credited as the birth of the genre, as well as things like the oft-forgotten sci-fi classic Aldebaran 3. Now, when we talk about text adventures, we do generally mean games which, whether or not they also have some graphics filling part or most of the screen, but they're primarily taking their command input from the player in the form of typed commands. That's generally anything from a single letter to a verb-noun, two-word pair to possibly complex sentences that involve multiple objects or a sequence of actions. I should point out towards the top here that a goodly number of the titles included here in eXoIF are still available for licensed sale on GOG and some other storefronts. So there is some amount of be aware what you do here. But I'm very enthusiastic about any project that advances the cause of text adventure / interactive fiction preservation, because it's been a challenging area for many reasons, some of which unfortunately do still affect this first release of eXoIF. So before I get into this, Chris and Dave, what's been your approach to getting hold of text adventures in the kind of post-commercial era? Do you track down the full box copy with all the docs and feelies? You wing it online and see if you get frustrated if you hit a cleverly disguised copy protection that looks like an unsolvable puzzle? Do the research on the interactive fiction database and MOCAG and so forth before starting?
If you mean the one text adventure I've actually played, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I found it very easy to find a box copy on eBay, to be honest, for next to nothing. It's almost as if I'm one of the few people that wants to play that game. But I also, before that, and I was happy to do this, I played it briefly in browser emulation first. I like to use bbc.zania.org, I think it is, which is a nice one. And there's also virtual.bbcmic.ro, which is fantastic. It's a fully rendered 3D BBC Micro in front of you with a cub monitor. Even has an annoying spot of screen glare, depending on the viewing angle. And you can rotate and zoom in and zoom out with that viewing angle as well. So that's quite a nice way to load and play these games.
Wait, where do you put your glare?
I try and get rid of it because I suffer migraines. And even though it's a simulated glare, something in my head goes, I'm going to get a migraine if I'm staring at that all day. So I try and maneuver it off, or I'll just poke it up in a corner. Right or left, I don't care. Yeah.
I prefer box games. Feelies and browsies really do matter for text adventures where they are present. However, there is a vast difference between some text adventures. I recently bought Souls of Darkon. And can I say why I bought Souls of Darkon, Jason?
I would love you to, yeah.
I bought Souls of Darkon because I'm a guest on a fantastic podcast, which I think you've been on once or twice, Jason, called The Retro Adventurers. It is Jason's other podcast. So we covered two stories. We covered Souls of Darkon and we covered Robots of Dawn. Souls of Darkon is a shorter game than Robots of Dawn. It's a tape-based text adventure, which means it's shorter. And Souls of Darkon is a disc-based one, although we were unsure whether it was available on disc on tape as well, based on an Asimov novel. Now, Souls of Darkon, the one I did buy because it was cheap, came with nothing. It was a clamshell thing with instructions on the reverse of the insert, one page of instructions, while Robots of Dawn had a fair bit of feelies and browsies, approaching the levels of Infocom, which presumably Epix did this, I think. They were trying to emulate Infocom type thing. Maybe they thought, if this is successful, we'll do a line of Infocom-like text adventures. But it was too expensive to get hold of, and it came from the USA, so I didn't get it. So I bought the useless one and not the one you actually needed. But I do like having the boxed things. I think they make a huge difference. I do not have a full Infocom collection. I will not start to collect Infocom because then what happens when I'm nearly done and I see the really expensive ones? But I have two boxes up there, the Lost Treasures of Infocom 1 and 2, as well as Leather Goddesses of Phobos for Chris. The one that was not included in the box set, as well as things like Zort Nemesis, Return to Zort, Zort Inquisitor, and so on. And those two box sets have most of the feelies or browsies inside. So feelies and browsies, for people who don't know, are the kind of the instructions, the exposition for the games, as well as some things to set the scene. So peril-sensitive glasses in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, for example. But other games had different little things, like the start of a map so you could get started, or a leaflet that you might have picked up in Sherlock Holmes times from the floor. Things like that they put in, and they really do help you set the scene. So they're important, and I love to have those. And I'll talk later on about why this is so good, because for that reason.
Yeah, and that episode of the Retro Adventures, which features Dave and a couple of robot-themed text adventures, is available now, so please check that out. We had a lot of fun on those. There are a number of reasons that text adventure preservation and contemporary play are challenging, and I did want to use my platform here this week on This Week in Retro to illuminate some of them in the hopes that the eXoIF team, which, let me be clear, has obviously made a significant effort in this collection, but I'm hoping that they will see and understand the need to do even more to make these games truly playable for new audiences, not just people like Dave and me that kind of know what we're getting in for and know how to research these games and really get the most out of them. So one of the reasons that preservation lagged in text adventures is that in several pirate scenes, text adventure releases literally were worth less scene credibility for pirate groups, either because they were less interesting to the player base than more action-oriented games, or because a lot of times text adventures would have either trivial or no on-disk copy protection at all. So in some cases, it took a concerted effort kind of long after that 8-bit text adventure commercial period dried up to track down and capture these games for posterity. Another reason is that very often, and especially among the more well-regarded professionally crafted titles, that game on disc or tape was not the sum total of information needed to enjoy the game. David already talked at some length about the browsies and the feelies, and these took a wide range of forms. Some companies, notably Level 9 and Magnetic Scrolls, they liked to commission a world-building novella that they would pack in. But this novella would also sometimes serve as in-game copy protection, as well as giving you details about characters or places that you're just not going to get with any combination of commands in the game world. Now, on the show and in many other places, the experience of the full big box PC game has been discussed. Text adventures really did often have material, lots of different forms, documents, postcards, ID badges, pamphlets, other media that would kind of elaborate and illuminate the game world. There were sometimes audio recordings. And unless you really know the game well, it's easy to overlook the importance of that scrap of paper, the prop matchbook, the ID card, or any of those other so-called feelies that were found in those premium adventure games. And the good news is that by and large, it does look like eXoIF includes most of this material in the 16 gigabyte torrent distribution. With almost 900 games, eXoIF does exacerbate one of our problems in this digital age of plenty, which is the tyranny of choice. And I'd love to hear from you guys at any point about how you kind of deal with the tyranny of choice now that we can play thousands of anythings. It's been charged that many text adventure creators made their puzzles deliberately so opaque as to be impossible so that they could sell you clue books or pay-per-call advice. I think in the vast majority of cases, there's not any merit to that charge. What we do know for sure, though, is that a commercial text adventure was once a major purchase, and you were making that purchase at a time when your galaxy of other game choices could be numbered in the dozens, like in the 1970s, or the hundreds in the early 1980s. Developers were trying to give buyers hours and hours and hours in some cases to really gnaw on a problem. Sometimes that came in the form of an exotic mechanical engineering puzzle or tormented logic or worse. So review and rating services like the Interactive Fiction Database, or yes, podcasts like the Retro Adventures, are still going to be useful to help you pick what you might enjoy out of that galaxy of, almost 900 titles. How do you guys deal with all the choice that we have in what we can play these days? Not just IF, but just generally.
Again, it comes back to big box games and original media. There's nothing I can't stand when you turn on an old computer and there's a list of you immediately hit with a list of games from Flash, and you can get quickly in and out of those games. It takes me back to what I did when I first got access to MAME and to Steam, not Steam as in the games thing for modern things, Steam as in STE emulator, and to the various Amstrad ones as well. And you got all these games, and you're in and out of these games in seconds, and you're playing it, and you're thinking about the other ones you've got to play, and it's terrible. And I find using original media helps when you have to load it up, when you have to install it in the hard disk, for example. That helps. A little bit of self-discipline. You just tell yourself, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play this game. I'm not going to flick through the channels as it used to be on satellite TV before we watched most things on demand. You have to do things to help there. Other people don't seem to have any difficulty with it, so it's not a problem that everyone has.
Some people just play Outrun exclusively, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, that's partially why I do things like the high score challenges and delve into different groups, because it gives you a focus of what game to play. And even without all the stuff that's preloaded on the hard drive, and I don't have the biggest collection, but I can even just stare at the shelves and go, I can't choose which game I want to pull out and try and load from tape off for the Spectrum. Or I can't choose which game I want to see works off the original floppy disks, because there's so many. And the funny thing is, there's a nostalgia to that as well, because I remember doing the exact same thing as a kid. Once I got towards the end of my time with the Spectrum, I had that many games. I've recently found out exactly how many games, but that's a story for another day. But I would look at them and I would have choice paralysis because I couldn't decide which one to load up. And by the time I chose, it was too late and I'd be off downstairs for dinner or something. So it's not a new phenomena, but it's worse now. So, yep, high score groups or pub, barcade challenges, that's how I do it.
Back to the additional materials, the feelies and so forth. The issue that I have with eXoIF's treatment of all the documentation and feelies is that they're basically just buried in an extras folder, which, and hat tip to Neil for helping me really right click, you can only get to by really right clicking the game and asking to explore that extras folder.
Can I ask what game it was that he showed you that with?
I believe it was an Ultima. You'll have to tell us which one it was. Yes. I'd asked for Bard's Tale. I got Ultima back, so that's how this goes. But yeah, the Launchbox powered front end shows a blurb for each game, shows some screenshots, and there is a clearly labeled link to the manual. But that one manual link frequently doesn't cover all the support material you need to play that game. And I'll pick Infocom's A Mind Forever Voyaging as an easy example. That game has code wheel protection. The good news is that the information you need to solve that code wheel is included in multiple forms in eXoIF. There's an HTML simulator of the code wheel. There's just a simple text-based table of the answers that you would need. That's good, but there's no meaningful mention of it on the game's launch screen. You'd have to dig into that extras folder to know what you might be missing to be ready to answer that challenge. And extras also includes things like third-party hints and solutions, meaning you don't have a clear way to delineate what's officially part of the game box, what's ancillary to it. I think that having a curated screen that tells you exactly which documents were part of the canonical shipped game, and therefore, ideally, you're going to either read first or have ready as you play the game, would be a major improvement for new players. And I really do want new players to be able to discover these games and not be immediately frustrated, which can easily happen if you don't understand what you're supposed to understand going into one of these games.
I really want to agree with you there. There's this thing on the internet with almost any hobby, which is you come into it as a new person and you need this information that you can only get once you've experienced it. And once you've become experienced, you can't be a new person to it. So yeah, I completely agree. There is work that they could do, and this is only part one, but there's work that they could do which would enhance the experience and say, what can we do to make the first experience of this even better?
Yeah. And so as things stand, it's still a really good idea to visit MOCAG, the Museum of Computer Adventure Game History, before you play one of these games, because on that site, you'll see exactly what was included and be able to browse through it. I also, just because I'm the text adventure guy, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I won't quibble a little bit with the curation. By and large, they do what they say they're doing. They compiled the commercial text adventures out there from the 70s through the 90s. And I appreciate that they say they're trying to stick with parser-based games. And they make a particular show of disclaiming up front, we excluded King's Quest. And they said that because you use keyboard navigation to move Sir Graham around, that's the reason it doesn't qualify. However, Star Trek The Kobayashi Alternative has keyboard navigation for Captain Kirk. It's all in text, but you actually do use cursor keys to move him. So to me, that's game, set, and match. They also include things like the Cornerstone Business Database program that famed adventure publisher Infocom published, and which notoriously contributed to the company's decline and eventual failure. But more than that, and I get it, they disclaim, like, we know this is not a text adventure, but it's important history. That's cool. But most damning of all, they include a game called Alice in Wonderland by Wyndham Classics. This is actually a proto-Maniac Mansion style game. It's got a joystick-based command entry system. It's got real-time character movement with the joystick that has kind of platformer elements to it. And they acknowledge in the description that it's an action platformer, but say it's focused on puzzle solving. But I have two questions. One is, where is Alice in Wonderland's forefather Below the Root, which is, first of all, one of the best games of all time, also very literary. It's based on a series of novels. But both of those games are arguably much more arcadey than King's Quest, and they undeniably have less typing. Like, there is no typing in Alice in Wonderland. All of the commands in the original King's Quest are entered in the keyboard. So if you're including Alice in Wonderland, I don't see why King's Quest is excluded. And it can't just be that they're afraid of, quote, legal action from Sierra, because Sierra, Infocom, and a whole whack of other things are all owned by Microsoft now. So it can't just be that.
I have a suggestion. I think it's because they're trying to say we need to have a line between what's going to be in a point-and-click archive and what's going to be in a text adventure archive. And they're trying to say, well, King's Quest should be there, but not here. And they're never going to get it exactly right. There's always going to be an edge case game that you can say, well, if you put that in, you need to put that in, or if you put that in there, then this can't. So I'm sure that they'll settle, and maybe the games will be taken out and put into a different EXO. I don't know. I wouldn't want to hit them with that stick. I think it could be seen to be too critical if we do that. I don't think I want to do that.
I'm not mad about it. I'm just, as the guy who spends a lot of time thinking about the genre, I'm like, well, hang on a second. And we've had spirited discussions behind the scenes at Retro Adventurers about, including King's Quest and so forth. But I was genuinely shocked to see Alice in Wonderland there, especially because they do have an EXO Scum VM. Even though it's not a Scum game, I could see the argument for throwing it in there because it absolutely is the template for that interface.
Maybe they'll say, well, when it goes on EXO Scum VM, we'll take it out. I don't know.
Yeah, that's all fine. There's also a real issue in the interface with games that span multiple disk volumes, because there's nothing clever done with them that makes disk swapping easier. It's on you to fight with the emulator over that, which is what happened in my playthrough of Nine Princes in Amber that I was quoting at the top of the story, and is likely to happen to you. The disk images are there. You just have to know, how to find them and swap them in the various emulators that come pre-configured. The good news and the bad news is that there is a way to avoid all of this, and that's generally to play the DOS version, which almost always was going to have a hard drive installer, so won't need disk swapping. But all DOS all the time to me isn't the nicest aesthetic. I linked it to the extensive games list. Did anything jump out at you guys about this project or the games included?
So I looked through the games, and it is, if you would ask me, it's the most popular text adventures that you can think of. Or anything Infocom I could think of was there. The British ones were there as well. The old adventure stuff was there too. I want to talk about, though, how it used to be for text adventures. Abandonware is a term that has fallen out of favour recently, but at the end of the 90s and into the 00s, the noughties, abandonware was a big deal. I don't think it was originally called abandonware. That name came about after it had been around. And what you got there was typically just the game itself, and you would have to go around and fish around to get stuff elsewhere. You'd have to do a bit of Googling, back when Google were not evil. You'd have to do a bit of Googling. Sometimes the abandonware sites would have documents, sometimes they wouldn't. And this is an enormous step forward. Being able even just to open up the extras folder and get used to it, or that MoCAG, which wasn't there as extensively back in 2001 or whatever it was when I remember, or at least I didn't know about it. So there is a huge step forward here. And this is just the first release. And they're going to get feedback from people. They're going to say, okay, how did it land? What can we do? And I hope that they can add these things to the point where you can open up the box and see what's inside and not touch the little pile of cheats and maps and things you shouldn't have got with the game, but they're there for if you want the help, because who's got the time these days to map out the maze in a game? But I hope they can do that. So I really hope that works. I want to talk about the copyright aspect of it as well and repeat what I've said before about the EXO project. I think the EXO project is vital for preservation. I think it is an absolutely wonderful thing that all the EXO projects to make these games accessible to people, because they aren't accessible. And if you're not of the vintage that had played these games originally, or perhaps if you had a different system to these, if you had a console instead of you had DOS, then maybe you wouldn't be able to access them now. So it's vital. But where the GOG or the Steam or something else version exists and is on sale, I would like Exo not to include the game files, but to have a receiving folder so that you can drop the game files in when you buy them and it can cope with that. I think that would, not because, again, I've said this before, not because I want people to make money out of it. I don't actually care. I think these things are so old now that people shouldn't be making money on it. But because I think the project is so important that it would be better if it took the coward's approach to copyright and did all it could to avoid any potential legal problems. Because these things cost £2 or £3 in GOG, so where's the harm in paying £2 or £3 for an old game? So that's what I would like to happen. As to what's on there to play, there's lots to look through. I looked at one called Essex, which is not the Essex I thought it was. I thought it was going to be the Essex Mud, but it's not. It's something else instead. But he has lots to play on there. 900 doesn't sound like a lot for some reason for these archives, but 900 is a massive amount.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot to do there. Even if they did nothing more, this would be a lifetime of text adventures.
That's true. I know who's got time for mapping, Dave. It's my son Luke, but you can't borrow him because he's still working on Sphinx Adventure, which is the only game that I played text adventure-wise or that I put any decent time into. And I checked it was on the list, and it is indeed.
I don't mind the mapping. It's the maze, though. There was a period in time in which a text adventure must have a maze. You must have a maze, so you must have to map out this maze. And the maze wasn't a grid thing. The maze was A went to B, but B went to D, and D went to A. And,
oh yes, into the iron passages of Sphinx Adventure that also don't seem to make any sense. But yeah, it's exactly that. And you get into the habit of dropping objects in different rooms so that you can tell the difference.
How did you end up with the one text adventure you've ever played being so bad? Like, there's so many better ones to choose from.
Well, it's funny because obviously you're a text adventure aficionado. To me, it was a text adventure, and I didn't really play many others. And I guess from even when we were just messing about doing it on the stream the other week, what stands out is the setting isn't clear at all. You know, most of the time, is this medieval? Is this whatever? And then you come across a pneumatic jackhammer. It's like, where did that come from? The rest of the time you're dealing with axes and swords and bottles, and so bizarre, really bizarre. And I guess what also is missing is the storytelling, which really is the key component of a text adventure because you don't have the graphics, right? And the storytelling really isn't there. So the only thing to draw you in is the puzzle solving and the mapping. And funnily enough, we're finding that quite entertaining in a frustrating kind of way. So there's something to it, but yeah. Anyway, enough about Sphinx Adventure. The other one I spotted on the list was Sex Vixens from Outer Space. That sounds quite interesting, so maybe I'll give that a go. But I think what this highlights to me is there's a whole wealth, just like when I've been ribbed about not playing enough point-and-click adventure games. There's a lot of text adventure games out there, and I've not even scratched the surface. I've played one game, so surely that needs rectifying.
I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
There are some things in text adventures that were left behind over the years and gladly left over behind. The maze is not the only one of the things. Modern interactive fiction is very different to text adventures, and maybe a shorter modern interactive fiction is a better way back in. I don't know. Yep. I don't know if that's controversial or
possibly.
Iconoclastic.
Well, the way I'll probably get back into this, I've got the Lone Wolf 1 and 2 hardback in the other room. So obviously that's a book, Choose Your Own Adventure book. And we did that in English class at school, and I've really been looking forward to getting back into that. They're quite simple, it's not high-level stuff. But I think that's another thing I want to do with Luke and or Zach.
Let's put Jason on the spot here and ask Jason. For people who, let's say, text adventures passed them by, which will be a significant portion of our audience because text adventures were falling away in the mid-'80s and into the 90s. And lots of our audience is a little bit younger than that. They were maybe 5 or 6 years old then. So if someone wanted to play a classic text adventure, they wanted to get into one, they wanted to get their teeth into something, but not too difficult, that didn't involve mapping out mazes, where should they start?
I'm going to divert that question. I will actually call out something from what I call the neo-retro scene, which has been growing. Like there's been a movement for the past several years to develop games that will and are playable on an 8-bit machine, but are designed using modern tools. I would point people to Captain Cutter's Treasure by Gary Francis. It's got kind of setting and world and puzzles that suit the old style, but it does have that, listen, we know you're not going to spend 90 hours on this game. You don't have that kind of time. It's got scope that's manageable, but is really well crafted. So that actually, if you either haven't played in 30 plus years and aren't really sure that you're up for a Zork level challenge, which I totally understand, I would point you to Captain Cutter's Treasure. Easy for me to say.
Is that the homework for everyone then?
Sure.
That's your homework, listeners. Twirlers, go and play Captain Cutter's
Treasure.
Captain Cutter's Treasure.
Yeah. And yes, all of this said, want to make it clear, I'm super jazzed to see text adventure collections getting a careful look for preservation. I nitpick at the little details here because I am the guy who played Star Trek Kobayashi Alternative, and I am the guy who knows about the history of Below the Root and Alice in Wonderland. So these are all nitpicks. I would love for eXoIF to give more players that are unfamiliar with these games every opportunity to understand them and play them correctly, and I will definitely be watching out for future versions.
We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by Pixel Addict magazine. Pixel Addict magazine is the premier, Britain's favourite classic computer magazine, also Australia's, Chris, isn't it? You like it in Australia, don't you?
Yes.
And
it's fantastic in Australia.
I'm noticing a text adventure on the front cover. There's a pile of discs and some tapes. And one of the text adventures there is The Lord of the Rings, a wonderful text adventure. If you can handle it, randomly saying OOM and just freezing because it's out of memory. Pixel Addict magazine has a number of things this week. They have a classic game analysis, Warlords. I need to play Warlords. I haven't played that for a long time. It's an Amiga and DOS game. The cover story, though, is Richard Hewison taking you behind the scenes as his time at Telecomsoft as a games tester. They were the people behind Firebird and Rainbird. He talks about working on titles like Elite, Druid, Thrust, Savage, and Rick Dangerous. What's the sound that Rick Dangerous makes? I can't do it. But thank you very much for sponsoring us this week. Where can people go if they want to buy it, Chris?
They can go to addict.media.
Well done.
I think.
Well done.
Didn't the website change at one point?
That is the right website, addict.media.
I knew it. Yes, I got it right. Yes, addict.media. Thank you.
I think I'm going to let people see a little bit behind the curtain, so to speak, at Twit Tawoo. It's a funny old game, this YouTube show or podcast or however you consume us. As the weekend approaches, each of us hosts know that we have a story to pick, and we might have kept up to date through the week at what's been submitted in the subreddit, or we might not. We might leave it to the Sunday to discover what we're going to do. And for those of you who don't know, that's where we get everything for the show. We look at what people have submitted. We look at how much they have upvoted things to find out what they're most interested in. And we'll pick one that we think will lead to a good discussion. But that isn't all that we do. The title of the show has always been This Week in Retro, so we feel we have a responsibility of some sorts to keep you up to date on what's happened in our corner of retro. In fact, that's how the show originally started, way back episode 1, was to cover everything briefly. We do that with news and briefs, where we try to cover what we think is interesting or important that we haven't picked as a main story, and also in housekeeping, where we try to cover updates on stories that we've previously covered. And it's been a while since I explained how the show works, so I thought it was a good time to do that. But with the recent week's break, and then last week's show being so full, we intentionally missed out news and brief. And I'm going to do a bit of a theme catch-up on a few things from there that I think are important for people to know about, because we've always tried to cover these things. And the theme for this little section is going to be modern add-ons. So the first on my little hit list is a new sound card for DOS and Windows PCs. An ISA sound card, ISA. I always get told off for how to pronounce it. I can't pronounce it any other way. ISA is the correct way to pronounce it, if you ask me. We've covered several of these before. They come from Edro and Leo. And the first thing they made together is the PC MIDI card, which allows intelligent mode MIDI output for the MT32, the Roland MT32 sound canvas, which you plug into your DOS computer. More than a handful of DOS games needed this to sound just right. Some of them sounded bad without it. Some of them sounded not quite right. So, for example, Loom, Dune 2, Monkey Island 2, loads and loads of Sierra games, for example, needed this intelligent mode to work properly. And from there, they went on to make other sound cards. For example, the Orpheus 1 and 2, the MK8330, the Gold Lib, which is an AdLib Gold remake, and the Mega card, which is a weird little niche card for the Amstrad Mega PC, which is the Mega Drive and the PC combined. And if you're in America, it's still a Mega Drive because this was a UK PC. But there are two new cards from them, the MK1869 and the MK1869 Extreme. The 1869 projects use the wonderful ESS audio drive, which is an audio chip developed as an alternative to Sound Blaster chips that was identical in sound and compatible and superior in many ways in terms of not having the same bugs that Sound Blaster had in their own cards. And in some ways, the best Sound Blaster was anything but a Sound Blaster. You want a good Sound Blaster, don't buy a Sound Blaster. They had proper OPL3, that's the FM synthesis that DOS fans are so used to. E1M1 Doom, for example. And despite the chip being extremely well designed and sounding great, it often ended up on budget cards, which is a bit like putting a Ferrari engine into a Lada. What Edro and Leo have done, though, is to put the chips into an incredibly well-engineered card. That's at least according to the video from Mike VSwitch0 on YouTube. He's gone into great detail regarding it.
Are these new old stock chips, or is that a chip that's still created? Okay.
No, these are all new old stock chips. Everything they've done, apart from the PC MIDI card, relies on new old stock chips. So they found the crystal chips, for example, from the Orpheus or the
audio drive.
Yeah, the ESS ones they found as well. That the chip is called an 1869. That's why they've done that. So they find these things. I don't know if they're recovered from old cards or maybe even laptops that had them built in or motherboards that had them built in, or whether they find a box of them that they've never used. I don't know, but the projects involve not just creating these things, but sourcing enough of the chips to make it worthwhile so they can make them. Unlike a lot of modern things, these actually require the official old chips to do it. I think there will be a point at which they can't continue doing these, at which they'll have to go to FPGA, and that will open up a whole new wonderful world as well. But for now, they have found enough 1869 chips to do it. The Extreme version, though, is the same card, but with a new old stock AMD interweave, which makes it a Gravis ultrasound plug-and-play, as well as an ESS audio drive. So it's an amazing thing to put in. Both cards so far have an unused USB port on them. They decided to add that for later use. They don't know what's going to be done with it, but maybe you'll get a mouse connection there. Means you don't have to use a serial mouse card on your old PC. Maybe it'll be a CD-ROM emulator. There's a wavetable header, so you can add, for example, an X2GS, so you can get SC55 sound. And you can also add on an optional PC MIDI card to get intelligent MIDI on the card too. So the last few MK1869s are available for sales, and pre-orders for the Extreme are supposed to finish on the 15th of July. But I did speak to Leo about it because I'm aware this was being broadcast on the 12th. So if you listen to this a few days late, you'll probably be able to be added on to the pre-list order if you contact them quick. So don't hang about. I have ordered mine. Next on my hit list is the Spectra Video Wi-Fi Pico add-on. I know nothing about the Spectra Video. It's definitely a blind spot for me, but this is again using a Raspberry Pi Pico, those wonderful devices that are powerful enough to act as various peripherals for our micros, but cheap enough to mean that the end result is not expensive. With it, you can load in ROMs or tape images for this thing for the Spectra Vision. And it's nice to see the machines that don't get a lot of interest getting these low-cost devices. What used to happen until the rise of the Pico, was that you tended to have someone inventing this solution to the problem, and they would manufacture a few. It would be difficult, and then you would be looking for that solution yourself and find out, yeah, the guy last made them in 2017, and he doesn't really do anything online. He doesn't pay attention to emails asking for them. So you can only get them from eBay when they go on very, very rarely for sale. But when these projects are made on Picos, usually what happens is you get a simple board that you can maybe perhaps get a PCBWay, for example, as a breakout I/O board for the Pico, and you just plop the Pico on there, and you go to a GitHub repository, program the card, which usually just means connecting it by USB and dropping a file on, and there you go. And it means to me that these projects are likely to stay around, rather than this weird thing that's happened with retro where things are invented and then lost again. So hopefully that won't happen. Next up is the Pico CPC. We've covered that before, but the work on it continues, and I'm convinced it's going to be the one single CPC add-on that becomes essential, giving you drive emulation, ROMs, memory, all sorts of other things to the CPC, really anything you can do through the expansion card. And as far as I can tell, they've nearly finished the main development of the features, and it's already extremely functional. So I'm really impressed with that one. And the final news on the Pico is the big one, I think, and that's been submitted, I think, 3 times in the past month. Firstly by myself, and then by a couple of other people, and it's the Pico Gus, what was originally called the Pegasus project. A Pi-based PC add-on that emulated a Gravis ultrasound. So Polpo, the guy behind it, or Ian Scott, has gone on a fantastic journey, starting with the Pegasus, becoming the Pico Gus. Pegasus is a much better name. Pegasus. Which only did the Gravis ultrasound, but it now does Tandy, Game Blaster, MPU 401 intelligent mode, so that's the MT32 I was talking about earlier on. It will now allow you to have a game port joystick through USB, so you can plug in a USB joystick and it'll read it as a game port joystick. You can now do Sound Blaster 2 with OPL2. It has a wavetable header, and it does really good sound quality because it's got a neat little DAC on it. But the big, and I think the amazing news, that it will now emulate a CD-ROM drive alongside all that. Now, I do love floppy disks. I think they're great, and my floppy disks still work all these years later. My research seems to show that for at least the non-high density floppy disks, they are durable. They still work fine all these years later, as long as they've not been contaminated or kept in a garage where they get condensation and freeze and thaw cycles. Optical media, on the other hand, though, I don't have the same nostalgia for. And even back in the day, I invariably moved the entire contents to hard disk because I didn't like the random access speed on them, which was seconds. And now there's reports about delamination in CD-ROM drives, but then that might be to do with the storage. It might be like floppy disks. So for years, I wanted a GoTech for CD-ROMs, or maybe even DVDs. And I think this is one giant leap towards that. The work that Ian does is open source, so someone can perhaps adapt it. At the moment, you can have it be in Sound Blaster mode, which will be a quite slow CD-ROM drive, as well as a Sound Blaster at the same time. And it also has what he calls USB mode, where I believe it's just emulating a CD drive and nothing else. The Sound Blaster mode can be a little bit stuttery on some games, where it's really struggling to do it all. I would imagine he'll make little improvements there where he can, but I think it's absolutely amazing that you can get CD emulation now. And it's a funny thing because I wanted it for so long and I didn't expect it to come this way. What do you think, Chris?
I think that's an awesome list, Dave. You've covered so much. CD emulation really pricked my ears because it's one of those things that I just assumed had been done until I realised it hadn't. And, you know, we take GoTechs for granted in terms of emulating floppy for all kinds of systems. I just assumed CDs had been done as well.
They kind of have. There have been a few projects, but they've never really been that there's been SCSI projects, and SCSI, I think, driven by the Mac community mostly.
Right.
They like, Macs always seem to like SCSI, and there's been a few. There was Blue SCSI, for example, I think is the most prolific now. And there have been CD projects. There was one project that was very expensive, proprietary, and didn't apparently work very well. because it's difficult. And this, I hope, there's not been a GoTech for IDE CD-ROM. There hasn't been that yet.
Yeah. Hopefully that can see where my head's going already is, especially since they've made this open source. That's great. If there can be a genericized solution, as generic as the GoTech seems to be, for multiple different systems, so that at one point in the future, maybe we can use something to even replace things in the CDTV, for example, or the CD32. You know, my CDTV plays most discs, but it's always ironic. It's always the one game that you actually really want to play. For me, that's Xenon 2, and it doesn't matter which image I burn, discs that will play quite happily on my friend's CDTV will not play on my CDTV. And because the rest of it's in such nice condition, I don't want to go so deep as to go tinkering about with there's a thing you can adjust to change the sensitivity of the laser. I don't want to pull the whole thing apart to that degree. So yeah, if we can move towards a nice generic solution for CD-ROM, that would be great.
Yeah, and it's interesting that something like that doesn't exist. Like, I know that there have been the GD-ROM replacements for the Dreamcast, so it'd be interesting if that oddball, solution was solved before kind of a generic CD-ROM interface. I think one of the challenges might be that there were those different interfaces even before we got to the standard IDE. Like, I don't even know what the CDTV has. Dave?
Yeah, there are lots of ODE projects, optical drive emulator projects, but they tend to be machine specific. So what I hope we end up with is this device like a GoTech, but a bit more complicated, because it'll have jumpers to tell it what device it's emulating, and maybe a pin header so that you can connect it to whatever you need to, and those little jumpers will set it to be that way, because these proprietary, complicated, expensive, closed source ones aren't ideal.
And when you were talking about those projects that would get spun up and then abandoned, a lot of times what would happen is the creator would be using some specific microcontroller or CPLD or whatever, and then they would say, well, it turns out that these are now 6 times more expensive than they were when I created it, so it really doesn't make sense for me to make these anymore. And that's one nice thing that the Raspberry Pi ecosystem, from the big ones on down to the Pico, have helped solve. Not that supply and price have remained totally stable on those. Is it my imagination, or was there kind of a lull in the Pico and General Pi-based add-ons once all of them were bought up in frustrated desperation 5 years ago?
Yeah. I remember the MT32 Pi project, another one of these, and all of a sudden you just couldn't get them, and it was terrible. But it's a funny thing you mentioned that, and the CPLDs, because lots of things like those, it seemed to bring on the end of those projects. They seemed to come to an end because of the chip shortages, and they never came back. And whereas if it wasn't for the chip shortages, maybe they'd have just plodded along on for longer and wouldn't have gone obsolete. I don't know. Links to everything discussed is in the show notes. Thanks to everybody who submitted these. Do keep these submissions coming. I think these projects are amazing and vital. I think one of the things we do is focus on these to tell people about them. And I think it's important to know that the device you maybe haven't touched well, might have a new lease of life in it.
Housekeeping.
I'd like to welcome our newest patron, Holly. Thank you very much for signing up to become an official twirler, Holly. I know you've been listening for a long time. Hi, my friend Holly. If you didn't catch it last week, part 1 of the patron Q&A is up. Part 2 will be released in a few days' time, I think, and we'll be recording more of that soon. We're still going through some things that need updating, like the website, etc. We'll get it all done. Literally nothing happened on the Commodore story since last week. I had this expectation this would be a developing thing, but nothing's happened. It feels strange because I just thought some things would change. But by the time you're watching this, another video should be due from Periphractic, so if it has piqued your interest, then have a look out for that. I want to thank everyone for their kind comments in public and also in private. We were concerned about the story last week. We tried really hard to be neutral and fair and factual rather than just spit out opinions. And when I watched the show back after Duncan has edited it, I felt proud of what we'd done. There was only a few people critical, and no one was outraged. No one was really critical. They were trying to be constructive with it. And I've got quite a few comments from people that I respect saying we've done well. So thank you very much for that. What seems to be a very long time ago, we covered Stop Killing Games, the project to try and stop games that required online activation, for example, or needed to connect to an online server for single player games to stop being killed off. And I think it's something that all of us in retro should feel passionate about, because we know that games that should be entering the world of retro might not if publishers can stop the servers that are needed for them. It's a complicated issue, and of course, online-based games, you can't make them run the server forever. I don't think anyone would want to do that. But the campaign has suddenly reached mainstream. All of a sudden, it's popular, and lots of publicity with petitions reaching the required amounts for politicians to discuss them. Now, the creator of the whole thing, Ross, feels like he's done what he can, so it's now up to lawmakers to decide if they want to do anything about it. I've seen some weirdness where people dismiss this as a bad idea or say there's more important things going on. We shouldn't be talking about this. And these people are wrong. I cannot understand why this old boomer attitude towards games that they shouldn't be talked about. They should be ashamed of playing games. It's coming from gamers themselves. What's that nonsense about? Games are important in culture. They're massively important financially now. They're part of our cultural heritage. So this is a big deal. And on to news in brief, an extended one to catch up. From Lord Borak, an image of the first smartwatch, the Seiko RC1000, aka the wrist terminal, which could connect to, among other things, a BBC Micro.
A sequel to Head Over Heels has been developed by one man in secret for over 35 years, and it's coming to the Amiga and the Atari ST later this year. Colin Porch is the guy behind it, and he was the programmer who originally converted it to the Atari ST. Thanks, Sheepo71.
And you can now output HDMI from your Commodore 64 with the IceVic, which is an FPGA-based module. Thanks to Senior by 445 for that one.
Pajako links us to a standard article on the return of Maplin. Maplin, formerly being an electronics retailer, they're now making some success as an online retailer. They're coming back.
Starcade 2084 links us to an advert of a high-end system in the early 80s, 19 megabyte hard disk, 64K of RAM, a disk controller, and a 12-inch monitor, and a 132 column dot matrix printer, all for the low price of $5,995 complete. It's almost as expensive as an Apple.
I was saying almost as much as Dave's about to spend on his next computer.
Yes.
And crowdfunding has enabled $8,000 to be raised to decap and scan the custom chips in the Atari Falcon, which will hopefully allow the eventual development of cycle-accurate FPGA recreation of those custom chips, according to the project. For those that don't know, Dave wrote some nasty stuff about the Amiga 1200 here, but the Atari Falcon 030 came out in the same year as that storied but ultimately just as doomed machine.
I like putting those little bombs in there for people to read, and I never mean it seriously. Good Punk 2 has a bit of self-promotion, which, if anyone wonders, it's fine to put your self-promotion in the subreddit. It's up to people to upvote and downvote it. He's created a YouTube channel dedicated to DOS intros, which is an interesting subject because game intros were a fairly new phenomenon that happened around the time of DOS. I remember them first seeing them on Psygnosis games. Might be something to talk about later on, maybe. And then, as you came to DOS, the hard disk gave you more room for the intro to kind of help set the scene.
Nantambi has linked us to a video showing how Frogger 2 source code was recovered from a destroyed tape. Thank you, Ribbit, for that one.
And Pajako has linked us to an Ars Technica article showing...
Sorry, it wasn't Ribbit that said it. Let's just carry on going. Let's just leave that blooper in there. Carry on, Jason.
Yeah. Pajako linked us to an Ars Technica article showing software engineer Doug Brown discovering and showing a photo of the team that made the Apple Power Mac hidden inside the ROM on some Mac G3s before Steve Jobs showed up and said, no more of this Easter egg business.
He was a lot of fun, Steve Jobs, wasn't he?
Got stuff done.
An unofficial FPGA-based Sega Neptune is coming in December, according to Time Extension. I haven't had time to look at this. I wanted, if I had all the time in the world, I would look into it to give it a look over and a sniff, because I want to make sure it's nothing like the Sega disaster, which we won't mention again. Thanks to Slight Cover 1385 for this.
Don't like the way you've written this next one, Dave. Dr. Local, and he's made me read it as well. Dr. Local links us to a video on Fatboy Slim showing the best 16-bit micro, the Atari ST, at the heart of his setup. It's in a video on him creating Rockefeller Skank.
And finally, our thanks to Sheepy Tina. Rob Smith has created a whack-a-mole game with floppy disk drives running on an Amiga. Rob has created several fun things in the past. This is yet another.
That's us mostly caught up. There's plenty more in the subreddit. Thank you very much for your submissions. Keep them coming. What's the URL, Jason?
That's reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
That's right.
MVG, or Modern Vintage Gamer, has dropped another one of his awesome videos, and it's called How an Owl Ruled the World. Shared with us by Juicy Cow on the subreddit, the video is about the early history of Psygnosis. Dimitri skillfully takes us right back to the current hot topic, it would seem, which is the demise of Imagine, and he follows the timeline through to the struggles with Mega Game Bandersnatch, through to its final inception, Britakis, on the ST and the Amiga. Britakis was developed and published by the newly formed, at that time, company Psygnosis, with the owl logo and branding famously created by UK artist Roger Dean. Roger, being famous for album cover art at the time, was of course also used for the box art of Psygnosis games as well. And I think Dave has just been pulling stuff off his shelves. Have you, Dave? Yeah, we'll come to that in a bit. The video, which I won't cover in full because you need to go and watch it, takes us through the 16-bit era, covering most of the games that we all know and love, and a few you may have forgotten about as well. It even talks about their R&D work with CD-ROM as early as 1990 and the work they put in for Commodore CD-TV games and demos, and their fully released CD-ROM title Microcosm, a game that I may have poo-pooed very recently in the past. And it ends teasing us with a part 2, which I assume we'll see enter the PlayStation era and maybe even cover the story through to the present day. I've mentioned before how Microprose was always a seal of quality for me, and I'd argue I felt the same way at the time about anything sporting that futuristic silver font and the stare of that owl peeking through me from the glossy black inner box once I'd removed the Rockstar artwork and sleeve before it. But were we wrong? Guys, what do you reckon? Psygnosis games, do you love them, or was the owl actually a pig with lipstick on?
I've been wondering, is this another stealth, Lemming/DMA design, story? Because Psygnosis ultimately funnels down to talking about Lemmings. I gotta say, honestly, no. Psygnosis not a mark of quality games for me, or at least what I would consider to be a game that I was going to really enjoy. Polished intros, absolutely. Likely guarantee of some fascinating audiovisual elements, or perhaps a really great theme tune, or both. Like Blood Money, Killing Game Show, those are great tunes, really interesting intros. But ultimately, they were not publishing many games that I really enjoyed playing. And I know that it's a thing, particularly in the budget Commodore 64 game scene from the UK, to say things like, well, the game was only £2 and the game itself wasn't very good, but it had some cracking music. Personally, I don't think that was really acceptable then at those prices. Definitely not acceptable in the 1632-bit era full-priced game space. I wanted different gameplay than what they typically delivered modulo Lemmings. Now, I do distinctly remember when I bought my Amiga 500 from a shop in November 1991. They gave me their copy of Chrono Quest, the French text adventure. There we go. That for some reason Psygnosis picked up and published in English, and its sequel. And basically strongly intimated that nobody had ever expressed any interest in buying it. And I could not get interested in that thing. But I should probably revisit it as an adult, see if I really missed out on something. I do remember it pretty quickly meeting its fate as a blank disc. But yeah, the thought that I had in listening to you talk about this, and Roger Dean and that, is we know that Electronic Arts, Trip Hawkins very consciously said we should treat game developers like bands, like rock bands. We should treat the releases like their rock albums, right down to the gatefold design that harkened back to a 12-inch album. It's almost like Psygnosis said, yes, we're going to do that, and every album every game is a Yes album. We're going to get Roger Dean. We're going to really focus on these lush soundscapes, and I love Yes personally, but there's as far as whether these were the games for me, not so much.
The imagination gap really, really matters. You could strip some of the best games down to just the gameplay and none of the story and none of the music and the graphics, and they lose a great deal. So having a game like Psygnosis did, and like I guess the Bitmap brothers as well were kind of similar in that hit you straight between the eyes when you loaded it up the first time with the intro, with all the rest of it. It really did carry the game. And these games don't age well because of it, because we're not blown away by saying, this is amazing seeing this in a computer, because it's not amazing seeing this in a computer anymore. We've got AI videos of Will Smith convincingly eating spaghetti. It's not as impressive now to see these things, but I love these games. Apart from Lemmings, my favourite game is The Killing Game Show. I mean, look at the box art, for example. The Killing Game Show is absolutely amazing. It's a kind of run and gun platformer, a little bit of puzzle solving with very much a vibe of The Running Man, a kind of a futuristic dystopian game show. And they got enough of the things right that the gameplay, which was fairly simple, was carried by it. And I know lots of people don't like The Killing Game Show, but I like it. It has one unique feature as well, or at least I felt it was unique. Maybe someone did it before then. When you die and lose a life, you can watch yourself replay the last life and take over from when you feel you made a mistake, which is a nice, unique thing. Other than that, though, I really liked Nitro, and Shadow of the Beast is nothing like as bad as people say it is. It's not a great game, but it's really atmospheric, and that matters. And it just needed a little bit of tweaking, and it would have been a great game. If the game was easy with that atmosphere, then everyone would have been happier. That's the big long box of it, yeah. Instead, it's incredibly difficult, and the frustration comes when you're trying to punch this tiny hitbox with this tiny effective punch, and it really gets to the point where you turn it off in disgust. But it is a great game. There's Chris showing off more boxes there.
And I see Jason's got number 2 behind him.
Yeah,
I always think of them as Amiga developers, although they weren't initially. But they did become, for me, I think, the developers that for a while the Amiga got second place because they got Atari ST ports and that was all. But eventually, places like Psygnosis started to really show, look, the Amiga can do more than the ST can do. It's got these custom chips. And they were the people that started to show what the Amiga could do. And then other people perhaps produced more deeper games and more gameplay. But Psygnosis were one of the first people really showing off what the Amiga could do there.
Yeah, no, those are fair points. And I think you've both mentioned, not all the games are for everyone. You've picked ones that you like, and there are others that you didn't, and that's fine. You mentioned Nitro already. I love the artwork of that. It made you, but if there wasn't screenshots on the back, would we see that as false advertising in certain games where the imagination gap's one way of putting it, but another way of putting it is false advertising, right? Because you look at the box art for Nitro and you think you're going to get some fantastic, awesome Mad Max style game, maybe similar to Overlander but better. And what you actually get is a game very similar to Supercars 2, for example. I think they're quite similar to that. Yeah. Still a good game, but not what I'd expect from that box art. Pteropods is an interesting one. I mean, I don't know what that box art is even meant to be, but
it's a pteropod.
It is a pteropod, but once you get into the game, it's obvious what it is. Yeah. But that's, I think a lot of their games, and I think Shadow of the Beast 1 and 2 fall into this, is they weren't necessarily bad games, but they were dead hard and they were complicated. Yeah. Pteropods definitely falls into that. You don't have a clue what's going on. You have to get your head into the material that comes with it, read the controls and get your head around what you're doing. Lemmings, we haven't mentioned that, but yeah, duh, it's awesome. Games that I felt were kind of accurate, Barbarian. So going back to the MVG video, he mentions Barbarian, not to be confused with the excellent game from Palace Software. It's very different in terms of you even control the Barbarian using the mouse and clicking on arrows rather than joystick input. Who sat in a meeting and decided that was a good idea? I'm not sure. So yeah, do look at it for the way he covers these games that a lot of us might not have even touched. And the other one I like to mention is Awesome, because I'm going to hold up a box here because I feel this is justified. This is my copy of Awesome. It's Starship.
Yeah.
It's Starship Command for the Acorn Electron, right? So as far as I'm concerned, Awesome is Starship Command with a fancy intro. But yeah, beautiful box art, beautiful intro. But I still, despite all that, I still think they were kind of a seal of quality, because I can't think of a terrible game. It's just that not every game is everyone's taste, and that's absolutely fine. And yes, Shadow of the Beast 1 and 2 were brutally hard, and even the developers have said it's a tech demo, but I don't care. Arcade games at the time were equally hard, and we praise them for that, and we say modern gamers are too soft. I absolutely love number 1, especially... and it made almost everyone at that time want an Amiga. That's how good the graphics were and the parallax scrolling and what it achieved with the machine. The oddity I want to mention, just going to pull it off the shelf, but from behind me, is this. And it's not a game many people would think of when you talk about Psygnosis. Oh, Dave's got it as well. But it's Armageddon, as in Armageddon, released in 1991. And it's so not in Psygnosis' wheelhouse to do a flight sim, but this game is not only that, it's a tank sim, it's a full-on combat management sim. I would argue it rivals Carrier Command, and it even has 2-player link-up for what I would assume be a multi-day long, gaming campaign as you try and beat your mate into submission in World War III. It's the only game I can think of like it in the Psygnosis stable, along with its 1994 sequel. And it's as smooth as heck, even on a stock A500, and easily rivals anything Microprose ever put out. Absolutely love it. Most confusing of all, though, is the fact that and it is Roger. I had to check this artwork on the Armageddon box is very unlike most of the other Psygnosis boxes, and that is a Roger Dean box. And why I find it very different to most of Psygnosis boxes is because I feel this actually represents what you get in the game, rather than sort of, not necessarily matching.
What he did 10 years before the game was even thought of.
Yes, exactly.
Imagine that,
yeah. Which actually happened, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I did actually double check, because I do occasionally do some research. And the only similar game which missed me back in the day is Air Combat Patrol. I'll link you to a gameplay video by Mr. Computer. But just imagine FA-18 Interceptor, only it looks much better. And that came out in 1993 for the Amiga, which is probably why I missed it, because that was quite late for me. I would have jumped to the PC by then. So I can't wait for part 2 of MVG's video about Psygnosis. And hopefully by that time, I'll be back in the other room so that I can have a screenshot of the PS4 version of Shadow of the Beast on display on the TV behind me. If you've not played that, you should. It's a hoot.
Let's go on to this week's question of the week. Now, last week, we asked you the question, with the loss of the last format magazine, we asked which magazine would you bring back? So let's take this out of contest mode. We're out. And the top answer is for Quantum Bovril. And he says, I was writing for Linux format. He says, was that the last format? Question mark? Yes, it was. And I'd like that gig back. So that, please.
Christ of YDU chimed in with the poignant, what, so I can watch it die again? And then followed up and said, I'll go for total NES and SNES Focus Mag aimed at kids, and I loved it. I have reread one fairly recently, though, and the reviews were quite all over the place.
And Chris said, where the heck is the Reddit link? Because I can't get to it on my Mac, because I can't remember where it is. Hang on.
Well, in the meantime, Darth Lovejoy says, mean machines, but TBH, when I used to buy it, it was more for the art and the screenshots of the game and the final game scores. That accent went all over the place. Sorry about that.
That was fantastic.
Thank you, Duncan.
Yeah.
Alan P. Thorpe says, 0. It appeared like a bolt from the blue, won Magazine of the Year for its first 2 years, and then it petered out. Just picked up the full set recently, and while some of the humour hasn't aged well, it's still bloody hilarious, and inspired my username. Also, R.I.P. Duncan MacDonald. I don't think Alan P. Thorpe was inspired by 0. He must be in a different username. Chris, are you with us yet?
Paul, aka Homeski, says, that's a yes, Dave. Input. I just loved its simplicity and graphic illustrated pages to assist all levels of teaching. Well, I guess there's nothing else we can add if it comes back out again. But then again, light bulb moment. Spectrum next? ? Hint.
There are lots of answers there. Have a look at the subreddit if you want to see them. And on to this week's question of the week. Jason, what is it?
Yeah, our question this week will be, what are your Psygnosis memories? Good or bad, excitement or disappointment? Let us know what you remember of that storied publisher.
Thank you for joining us this week. We've gone over time again, but we've caught up at least. Holly will be happy. Holly's always telling me the show isn't long enough. Duncan, on the other hand, is always telling us the show's too long. Poor Duncan, petty poor Duncan, sitting there huddled over a pot noodle, having to edit this thing, knowing already that we've gone over time and sitting there going, shut up, Dave, you say too many things. Thank you for joining us, twirlers. We'll see you next week.
And we're waving.
And we're waving.
I'm waving. Jason's waving.
Everybody's waving. The owl's waving.
Thank you all.
Woo!
Bye.
Text us sometime.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 The Gamer, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.